You're listening to Healthcare Heartbeat, brought to you by Avant Healthcare Professionals.
Welcome to Healthcare Heartbeat, a podcast produced by Avant Healthcare Professionals. I'm joined today by a guest, but also the guest host for this episode, Jennifer Reeves.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So we've had you on the podcast before. So it's, you're a natural, right? You're a veteran of the podcast. We talked about the IELTS exam.
Yes.
Well, it felt like a natural follow-up to then talk about the OET exam.
Yeah.
And you were the absolute best person to host this, better than I. And you'll be talking all about the OET in this episode, but what are some key points for anyone out there that maybe has never heard of the OET or has heard of it and is a little bit curious? What are the main important things to know that we're going to be discussing this episode?
Absolutely. So for starters, OET stands for the Occupational English Test. And so what that really means is the OET is a healthcare specific English proficiency exam. So it is an English proficiency exam. It is assessing English communication skills, but in the context of healthcare. Yes, so it's very unique in terms of English proficiency exams out there, and it is one of the exams that is acceptable for the U.S. immigration process. So it is a good alternative for those looking around, thinking which English proficiency exam would be best for them in the immigration process. It's an alternative to exams like IELTS or TOEFL, which we talked about last time.
Yeah, and there's a lot of confusion around this exam. There are a lot of questions that we get regularly about this exam. So we felt, what better way to address those questions and the confusion around it than to just do an episode all about it. And we have a representative from OET that joins you on this episode, and you guys really dive in. So I am very excited for this episode, for you to learn more about OET, for you to learn its similarities and differences to TOEFL and IELTS, and for you to be able to assess if OET is maybe the right choice for you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jennifer Reeves, and I'm the English Program Manager here at Avant. And today I'm joined by Jack Wass, U.S. Education Specialist with OET. Jack, thank you so much for being here today.
Of course. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm excited to speak with you more about OET, and of course, thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So, Jack, let's just get into it, right? OET. I think as many of our viewers may know, OET is synonymous and well known for being a healthcare test in the English proficiency exam space. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what that means?
Absolutely, yes. So the first thing to mention is that OET is the only English language test specifically for healthcare professionals. So it's designed with those healthcare professionals in mind. An example of that you can see here are the different subtests. So I'm going to get into the different subtests more later, but just briefly, you can see that there's a listening, reading, writing, and speaking subtest, and each of them kind of covers different healthcare scenarios and tasks. I'm going to talk a little bit more about those later, but just to kind of show you at a very high level what candidates are being tested on in OET. Another thing to mention is that the content is reviewed by licensed healthcare professionals in each of the countries where the test operates. So for example, the nursing version of OET is reviewed by a licensed nurse who also helps to write some of the content. One example here of how OET is different from other English language tests on the market can be seen here on this slide. So for example, in a general or more academic English test, the writing section might have candidates write an essay on a general topic. So maybe something like global warming, for example. Whereas with OET, candidates are writing a healthcare letter, typically a referral letter, and it's based on case notes, so something that's a lot more clinical and familiar to candidates. And then the same thing for the speaking subtest. In a general or academic English test, candidates might have to participate in a structured interview on a general topic, whereas with OET, they are participating in a patient role play where the candidate is taking the role of a nurse or another healthcare professional, and the interlocutor who's also on the speaking part with them is playing the role of a patient or a patient's family member.
Wow, that's great information. Thank you, Jack, for sharing all of that with us. So, something I want to ask you, I think a lot of healthcare professionals, when they're looking at the OET exam, they sort of have this impression that, OET is scoring them specifically on healthcare knowledge. But our understanding is that's not exactly the case. Can you tell us a little bit more about what exactly OET is looking for when evaluating candidates on this exam?
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great question. We do get that from candidates every once in a while. So yes, at the end of the day, OET is an English language test. So candidates are being scored and evaluated on their English knowledge and production. That being said, of course, as I mentioned, it's in a healthcare specific context. But at the end of the day, what's being assessed and evaluated for candidates is their knowledge of English and how are they able to use it in healthcare contexts, not the accuracy of their statements in terms of a medical or technical standpoint.
Yes, that's such important information. Thank you so much for elaborating on that for us. Now, I know you gave us a really great overview earlier, mentioning the 4 different parts of the exam, but I'd love to spend a little more time and look at those a little more specifically so we can get some more detail. So, can you tell us a little bit more about each of the different parts of the OET exam and how they work? What's going on those parts?
Absolutely. So let's start out with the first subtest, which would be the speaking part. So as you can see here on this slide, the speaking part takes around 20 minutes, and it's made up of 2 different role plays designed to give candidates the opportunity to demonstrate a range of English and the ability to speak to patients or their family members on a variety of healthcare issues, where they might have to use some skills like explaining, reassuring, advising, persuading, and responding. And then one other thing to note here is that this role play is between the candidate and an interlocutor, right? So the candidate takes the role of a healthcare professional, whereas the interlocutor takes the role of a patient or a patient's family member. One thing to note here is that the interlocutor is only there to help facilitate the role play. They have no part in the assessment. Next, I want to show you just an example of kind of what the speaking test would look like. So this slide here that you can see is an example role card that the interlocutor would receive as part of the speaking section. So you can see information about the patient and the different tasks or the different things that the interlocutor has to mention as part of the role play. And then also the next slide will be the same thing, but for the candidate, right? What information does the candidate receive, right? It says the setting where the role play would take place, information about the patient that the nurse will be interacting with, and then of course the different tasks that they have to cover as part of the role play. So the next subtest that I want to cover is the listening subtest. And as you can see on this slide, there's a total of 3 parts, and it takes approximately 40 minutes. In part A, there are 2 separate consultations between a healthcare professional and a patient. And this is typically something that nurses are very comfortable with, right? There's no need to change any information that's heard in the audio. Instead, candidates have to write exactly what they hear to complete the gaps or blanks in a series of case notes. And there are 12 questions for a total of 2 audios in this part. Next part is part B, and there are 6 short dialogues or monologues in workplace settings. And these are the types of conversations that healthcare professionals have with colleagues. So something like a handover of a patient, a team briefing, or feedback to a healthcare professional from a mentor. And in this part, there's one multiple choice question for each of the audios that are being heard. And lastly, part C are 2 long presentations or interviews with healthcare professionals. And these are typical of professional development content that healthcare professionals listen to. So presenters might describe the work that they do in their healthcare field or the development in a treatment of a condition, for example. And there are 6 questions for each of the 2 audios in this part C. And then just to give you an example of what the listening test might look like. So this is a screenshot from one of our sample tests, and this is actually from part A, right? So you can see the case notes listed here that have the gaps or blanks, and this is what the candidate has to listen for and complete and fill in these gaps to enter the missing information in these case notes. The next subtest I want to cover is the reading subtest, which also has a total of 3 parts and takes around 60 minutes. Part A is an expeditious or fast reading task, and this is completed as 15 minutes and is designed to replicate the workplace where nurses or other healthcare professionals don't really have the luxury of time to consider information or check the meaning of words, for example. So in this part, candidates have to use their skimming and scanning skills to quickly find information from one of 4 texts and copy this as their answer. And this part is made up of 20 questions. Part B are 6 short workplace extracts, and these short texts are typical of those sent as an email or a memo in a workplace setting or found on a staff room notice board. So something like policy updates, machine operating instructions, and there's one multiple choice question for each of the 6 texts in this part B. And lastly, part C are 2 long passages. So like the listening section that we just covered, these are typical of professional development content of general interest to all healthcare professionals. And then lastly, just to cover an example of what the reading section looks like, you can see on this slide one of the reading tasks from part A, and then some of the questions that need to be answered. So for example, you can see text A and text B. As I said before, part A covers 4 different texts, but this example just shows you 2 of them. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see some of the questions that candidates have to answer based on these texts. And the last subtest to cover is the writing subtest, which takes around 45 minutes. So you can see here that there is 5 minutes of reading time and then 40 minutes to actually write the letter. And the letter is a profession-specific letter based on a set of clinical case notes. So typically it's in the form of a referral letter or a discharge summary. And the writing task also gives candidates time to read the case history, which is typically something very familiar to nurses. And at the end of the case notes is the writing task, containing details of who they need to write the letter to and why. Now, everything that needs to be included in the letter can be found in these case notes. So candidates just need to decide which information the reader needs to continue care and how to organize the letter to be as clear as possible for candidates. Okay, so now to give you an example of what the writing portion looks like, on this slide you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see some of the case notes that candidates are presented with, right? You see the patient details, some of the medical history, and some other details about the patient. And then on the right-hand side, after the case notes, is the writing task, right? So of course, this is the information that needs to be included in the letter and gives you some details about maybe how to start out or what to make sure to mention in your letter.
That was great information. Definitely super helpful for our viewers to see all of that. Now, I've got to ask you, Jack, at this time, because I know our viewers are just dying to know the answer to this question, which is based on all of that information, how are they going to be assessed on their ability to do all of these things when they take the OET test?
One of the cool pieces specifically about the writing and the speaking portion is that we have our assessment criteria posted on the OET website for candidates to view. So just to give you an example, this slide is showing the writing assessment criteria. So you can see the different areas that candidates are being assessed on, appropriateness of language, comprehension of stimulus, and of course those linguistic features and presentation features. So all this information really clearly lays out for candidates what they're being assessed on in writing. And of course there's also an example for speaking as well, right? The assessment criteria and the different level descriptors. So again, this kind of shows candidates what to make sure to focus on and how they're being assessed in those different areas.
Excellent. And just to reiterate for our viewers, if you couldn't already tell by what's on the screen, remember this is an English proficiency exam, right? It is not an exam of your healthcare knowledge. So make sure to check that out on the OET website so you know exactly how to prepare for the test. And also, Jack, another thing I wanted to ask you, just for our viewers' clarification, I know that OET is kind of distinct in that it uses both a numerical scoring system as well as a letter-based scoring system. Can you just quickly tell us a little bit more about that and what that means for candidates?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, candidates receive a different score for each of the 4 subtests, right? And they're going to receive that score in the form of a letter grade, so an A down to a C and D, and then also a numerical score. So on this slide, you can see in the leftmost column the letter grade, A, B, C plus C, and then in the column to the right, you can see the numerical score that corresponds to that letter. So for example, an OET B corresponds to a score of between 350 and 440. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that OET is not a pass-fail exam, right? Depending on what regulatory body you are using your results for, that would determine what score you are required to receive in each of the subtests. So typically for nurses, they're looking for a score of B or a C plus, so between a 300 and a 350, depending on the regulatory body.
Thanks for explaining all that, Jack, about the scoring, because I know sometimes people wonder, hey, what is a B? What is a C? What does all that mean? But Jack, actually, you said something really important earlier in our conversation, speaking of the speaking test, and that was about the role of the interlocutor. And I'd really love to go back to that for a second for our viewers, because I know that many of them have concerns when it comes to doing a speaking test in front of another person, right? With another person present in the room. So can you just quickly re-emphasize and reiterate, what is the role of the interlocutor here in this OET speaking test? And what exactly is that interlocutor there to do as part of the speaking test?
Absolutely. So the interlocutor, as you mentioned, is only there for the speaking part, the speaking subtest, and the interlocutor is only there to play the role of the patient or the patient's family member in that role play, or those 2 role plays that the candidate will be doing. So the candidate will play the role of the nurse, and the interlocutor will play the role of the patient or the patient's family member. The interlocutor is only there to help carry out the role play. They have no part in the assessment of the exam, right? So they're not the person that's grading you. They're just there to help you play the role of the nurse in this role play, and to kind of read off that role card that we showed earlier in the speaking section. But again, yeah, they have no part in your assessment or grading.
That's a really important point, I think, for viewers to know. And I'm curious to ask, Jack, based on your experience, do you find that test takers respond well to that, to having an interlocutor as part of their exam experience versus, let's say, an actual examiner, right? Or an actual rater who they know will score their test at some point?
Yeah, I do think that we've seen kind of positive feedback and results from candidates who have completed the speaking subtest. So for example, once they kind of get past maybe that nervousness and thinking that the interlocutor is there to assess them, once they kind of realize that they're just that the interlocutor is just there to help them with the role play, they do seem to be a lot more at ease during this conversation, and more so since they're playing the role of a nurse, right? Something that they're familiar with and feel comfortable doing, and they seem to be a lot more at ease when doing the speaking subtest.
So, Jack, another thing I think our viewers are interested in knowing is a little bit more about, the price point associated with OET, because of course, every English proficiency exam comes with its own price and costs associated. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that does look like for the OET exam?
Of course. So the cost of OET is 587 Australian dollars, with which today's exchange rate is about 390 USD or American dollars. So in order to kind of calculate the price of OET, you would take that 587 Australian dollars and use the exchange rate of the local currency that you would be paying for the test in. Now, you might notice that this is a little bit higher than maybe some of the other English language tests on the market. And there's a lot of different reasons behind that. The first thing is kind of the additional layers of compliance and regulation that OET goes through in terms of quality control and really ensuring that the tasks that are included in the test are authentic and reflective of current practice in the different version of OET that are being offered. So for example, as I mentioned before, there are subject matter experts in the different professions that are consulted to help write test items for OET. So OET nursing, there's a nurse that we have on staff that is consulted in terms of checking the relevance and the authenticity of the different tasks to make sure that they're reflective of current practice in nursing.
Wow. And if we stop to think about the significance of that, I mean, there are 12 different disciplines, right, that are assessed with OET. Is that true?
That is true, right? There are 12 different versions of OET for different healthcare professionals. So, of course, OET nursing, OET medicine, there's pharmacy, physical therapy, 12 different versions out there that all have a similar process where the content is reviewed and checked for authenticity and to make sure that everything is kind of up to standard and really reflecting questions that are accurate for those different professions. And then also, another thing to mention is that OET is double graded by trained assessors, which also kind of increases the price a little bit, but really adds that additional security versus other tests that might use auto grading, which is a little bit cheaper.
Wow. But honestly, hearing all of those things and all of those measures that OET is taking to provide this test, this healthcare specific test as an option, for candidates, I really do think that would yield honestly a high value, right, in return for that investment.
Of course, yes, we recognize that OET is a little bit more expensive, but with that, there's a lot of things that candidates get in return. So the first thing to mention is that our candidates report to us much more confidence when taking OET and on the job due to the relevant test materials and the authentic scenarios. So we already covered the different parts of the test, but right when they're preparing for writing that healthcare letter and when they're engaging in that role play between the nurse and the patient, they're really practicing skills and the type of language that they would use on the job. And because that, they report to us that they feel a lot more confident and engaged when preparing for OET. And going along with that, of course, is some of the medical English and terminology that's used in OET, which will also help nurses when they have job interviews as part of their process of becoming licensed to work in the United States. So not only is preparing for OET helping them to pass the OET test, but it also is really getting them familiar with some of that knowledge and terminology that they might need for other parts of their nursing journey. And then lastly, just two additional benefits that candidates typically find when taking OET is the improved professional communication with patients and colleagues, right? So we talked a lot already about how OET prepares candidates to speak with patients in the role play and in other pieces of the test, but also with colleagues, right? So they're having the types of conversations that they would have with professional colleagues. During the listening part, they're listening to professionals speak about different aspects of nursing and some professional development content. So they're really kind of improving that communication both with patients and with colleagues. And lastly, OET helps candidates to improve their cultural sensitivity in the workplace. And one example of this is in the speaking component. OET speaking of is of course assessing the candidate's ability to speak and engage in these healthcare role plays, but also there's a focus on clinical communication, which really kind of encompasses how candidates are interacting with patients. Are they giving them a space to engage and to really share their concerns with the nurse? So OET also helps to help candidates improve that piece.
Absolutely. Those are some very valuable returns on the investment, if I do say so. And finally, Jack, I'd like us to sort of segue into thinking about preparing for this exam, right? And so, for some viewers out there, I think maybe a common thought that might be floating around is, oh, well, I'm a nurse, it's a healthcare test. Do I really need to do that much studying, to prepare for this thing? What is your take on that, right? Like, how much should a person be preparing for success on the OET exam?
That's a great question, and that is something that we hear pretty commonly with candidates. And as I mentioned before, OET at the end of the day is an English language test, right? And specifically for those that are hoping to use OET for migration purposes and for nursing, there is a very advanced level of English that is needed for candidates in order to certify them and certify that they have the English language level needed in order to effectively work with patients in a way that is required of their profession. So studying is essential for success. And one of the other things to mention is that a failure to study can really affect your score and also maybe even result in needing to retake the test. So it is really important to dedicate that time to prepare. One of the things that I like to kind of mention with candidates is that there's kind of two levels of preparation that are needed. The first one, of course, is those English language skills, right, which you need in order to take any general English test. So needing to know vocabulary and grammar and the structure of the language. So that's kind of the first area that candidates need to prepare. And then the second area is the structure of the test. Right? So we talked already today about the different subtests and the different types of questions that are needed in those different subtests. So it's important to really understand the structure, what you'll be tested on, what is the assessment criteria, what type of questions will you encounter when testing. That's another piece that's really crucial for candidates to know before they sit for the OET test.
So true. Absolutely. Got to know those fundamentals, right? Or can't really expect to get those high level scores we were just discussing earlier, right, in the episode. So, Jack, to sort of wrap us up here today, can you help our viewers at home by giving them some recommendations on how they can go about preparing for this OET exam? Since, as we mentioned, it's very essential for their success to actually prepare for the test.
Of course, yeah. So the first thing that I'd like to mention is some of the resources available on our website. So our website overall is oet.com. In order to find preparation resources, you can go to our Ready website, which is oet.com/ready. And on this website, you can find just a breadth of free preparation resources available. So some examples here are sample tests. We saw screenshots from some of those sample tests earlier on in the episode. A free Intro to OET course, the free OET study guide, and writing and speaking guides. And as I mentioned, on our website, there's a variety of free resources and also some paid low-cost resources depending on your preparation budget. So I mentioned on this slide the OET study guide. Here is just a little bit more information about that. So on the study guide, there are resources and tips that cover the 4 sections of the test. as well as practice materials and some sample tests. So this really helps candidates to prepare in knowing about the structure of the exam, which I was just talking about before, and the importance of that in terms of preparation. So this is a great resource to help candidates with that piece. Another thing we offer are some free digital courses on our website. So this is an example of 3 of the free digital courses that we offer: an Intro to OET course for nurses, a free taster course for nursing by OET Online, and then the third one, which is focusing on speaking, is a speaking booster course, which really talks about those clinical communication skills that are so essential to the speaking subtest. So this is another great resource. Each of these courses takes around 10 hours and can be done asynchronously. They're kind of a self-study resource that nurses can use, and they can access these for free on the OET website. They just have to go to the OET store. Another resource here are some skill-specific courses. So these ones are not free. They have a cost of 30 Australian dollars, which again, I believe is about 18 or 19 USD. And they are skill specific. So maybe if a nurse is struggling with the listening part of the exam or the writing part, they can purchase one of these courses and really do a deep dive into the skills and tips and strategies needed to do well on that specific subtest. So there's one for each of the 4 subtests. And again, they're good for those candidates that are maybe struggling with a specific skill of OET. And then lastly, just to mention here are social media. So the education team, the OET education team, creates daily content for the OET social media channels, giving useful tips and advice to candidates preparing for OET. And it's also a great place to get the latest news from OET. So you can see on this slide, you can follow us at @officialOET on Twitter, LinkedIn, also Facebook and YouTube, and then also on Instagram as well.
Jack, thank you so much for your time today and for really just going over all this essential, important, and detailed information with our viewers so they can get a better understanding of the OET, right? And all the value there is to the exam. Just as a reminder, before we go, where can our viewers go to find you all and to access these resources that you went over today?
Yeah, so the first stop, as I mentioned, would be just the OET website, which is oet.com. And then that website for the preparation resources and kind of some of those free materials that I was mentioning would be oet.com/ready. And then in terms of social media, you can follow us at @officialOET. One of the top things that I would recommend is our YouTube channel. So there's hours worth of free master classes and webinars and workshops on the different parts of the test. So definitely check out those videos on our YouTube channel. And then lastly, I just want to thank you as well for the opportunity to speak more about OET and for this great medium.
Jack, thank you so much again for your time today. We look forward to having you again on Healthcare Heartbeat in the future.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
We're back in studio. Jen, you guys covered a lot that episode about OET.
Yes.
Man, oh man. So if you're watching, listening, I think you have everything you need to, better understand OET and if it is a good option for you. Now, I would encourage you once again to go back and listen to and check out our episode about IELTS and TOEFL, because then you're going to get the complete landscape of understanding of all of your options that are available to you. And when we're talking about options, you have a lot of options when it comes to staffing agencies. And I don't know if you could say we're biased, but we feel pretty strongly that Avant is the best. And for one of the many reasons why Avant is the best is because of our AEP program. So Jen, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yes. So as Ross mentioned, the Avant English program is a very unique and special benefit of being on the Avant program. And so AEP caters to all the English proficiency exams that are accepted for the U.S. immigration process. We provide in-house developed curriculum and study support. So we really do support our healthcare professionals every step of their journey in completing their English proficiency exam of choice for the U.S. immigration process. And we offer a great variety of resources to help in that endeavor, as well as the personalized support from our very dedicated and enthusiastic Avant English program team.
Yeah, I think it makes all the difference in the world to have a dedicated team of people who have been through this or been through this with, hundreds, if not, just thousands of nurses and candidates who have been through this program, and understanding maybe the common, issues that they have, the things to look out for, the things that, can really set you on the path to success. And that is every single member of the AEP team. And that's here at Avant. So, when you are considering your options for an English exam, I also highly encourage you to consider your options for the partner that you're going to work with. And
Absolutely.
I think the Avant English program is a perfect example of, really going with the best. And I think the one that makes sense for so many of our healthcare professionals out there looking to come and work in the United States. Thanks for checking out this episode of Healthcare Heartbeat. Wherever you are listening or watching, I ask, could you subscribe and like and leave a comment or a review? We love to hear from you. It definitely helps us determine what kind of content we'll be creating. And when you subscribe, you're not going to miss an episode. That's what's important. We're creating so much content to help you with your journey to becoming a healthcare professional in the U.S.
Thanks for listening. This has been Healthcare Heartbeat by Avant Healthcare Professionals, the leader in international healthcare staffing and recruitment, where we change the lives of healthcare professionals every day. To learn more about how our healthcare professionals can help your facility, visit AvantHealthcare.com and be sure to subscribe to this show wherever you get your podcasts.